Sometimes it depends on the industry who uses the word RevOps and who uses marketing operations, sales operations. They are interchangeable, but I firmly believe marketing and sales are aligned and they're the same department.
Welcome to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. I'm Ed Marsh, your host, and today I'm joined by Cece Kintner. Cece is the Director, Marketing and Sales Operations at TechStream, where she's responsible for marketing strategy, sales enablement, and the tools and processes used to tell the TechStream story. She has 20 plus years of experience in marketing, sales, and event management. She's a graduate of Central Michigan University, and she resides in Metro Atlanta with her husband and what she calls her fur babies. So that's her official bio. But here's what you need to know in order to understand why you have to listen so carefully today. Cece's been where you are, and she's arrived at where you're going to have to go. She started her career in industrial marketing with a small capital equipment company in a very competitive space, selling primarily through sales channel. Then she spent years in trade shows and events. And then for the last couple of years, she's been in the managed services tech space and now on the other side of sales channel. So she understands the vendor side and the channel side. She understands industrial marketing and sales and also best practices from technology. And she's watched the evolution of buyer behaviors and marketing and sales. She is obviously a strong believer in trade shows and events, as strong a believer as anyone, but she also understands where they fit and their limitations and how they fit as part of an integrated approach to go to market. She has a strong partnership bias, and she's been through market evolutions. I mean, when I first knew her back in the packaging machinery space, that was at a time when we all worked with phone calls and faxes and printed brochures. So in other words, for those of you who hide behind some version of that's not the way our industry works, Cece could well be your worst nightmare because she knows how yours works and she knows how others work too, and she's going to be able to help us, I think, connect those dots today. So with that, I'd ask you to please pay close attention. She's going to have, I think, a lot of really important knowledge for us. Prepare to have some of your sacred cows challenged. And as we jump in, you know the drill. Hit the like button. Please subscribe, share, comment so that it helps others discover this helpful information. So with that, welcome, Cece.
Thanks, Ed. Good to see you.
Absolutely. So I've shared the highlight reel. Give us the color commentary of your career progression.
Okay, so I did you and I met each other when I was in the packaging machinery industry, and we'll say that I was very young, as we all were, right? You mentioned faxes, so I have to bring that up. Just kidding. No, it was a really interesting start into what I would consider my ideal career. But I like to think of my early days as just understanding people and processes and getting to know how things worked. And I laugh when you say I could be your worst enemy as far as my knowledge, but I don't know about that per se. But I do like to challenge what we consider to be normal textbook marketing processes, right?
Right.
So they have to work. They have to meet the person, the buyer, the person that you're trying to work with, where they're at. And so at the end of the day, anything might work and anything might not work, but you have to try things out and you have to be open to change when you're in marketing.
I love the idea of trying things out. One of the things we're going to talk about is how you experiment, how you construct experiments, how you go through that, how you evaluate the results, how you get others on board with the experiment. But first, let's deal with the elephant in the room, and that's the question of industrial versus tech. I talk with lots of industrial manufacturing execs who kind of came of professional age in the same era back when we collaborated, fax machines. They get now, of course, that we use a website, but they think of it as a new brochure. They understand that we use email instead of FedEx, but I don't think they really understand how buyers have changed. Even though they've changed themselves and their companies buy in different ways, they still think of their prospects and customers in kind of a static way. So you've got lots of perspective from mid 90s through 2020s. What are the most important changes that we all need to understand?
One of the easiest things to think about there is that buyers don't come to me or to my team to ask all of their questions any longer. Before we even know who they are or that they have interest in our product, they have done research, right?
Right.
They've been online, they've been looking at things, they've been reading reviews, they've been digging into us and our competitors, probably. So it doesn't matter who you're looking at or what kind of product you're looking for. You've got to understand that the buyers are usually doing a lot of legwork before they even come to you and say, hey, raising my hand, here's something I'm looking for. I think
And
that's
so
the
that,
biggest change.
yeah, for sure. And that means they're using technology, and
Right.
different buyers will have different comfort levels with different degrees of technology. But what we think we might be comfortable with isn't necessarily what a rising generation of buyers would be comfortable with. I mean, chatbots and SMS apps and other kinds of things to help them connect with people rather than picking up the phone and calling, maybe.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, this is really it's not even a generational thing. It's a behavior change in general, in the sense that old timers like myself could be the same way, right? I pick up my phone and I do my research before I'm ever looking at any sort of product, no matter
Right.
what it is, right? Personal, business, anything. I'm looking for things in a different way than I did back then, and you know you mentioned trade shows. They really are an integral part of our business um, process and any sort of marketing campaign and marketing overall strategy. But they also are different, right? So it's super important to build those relationships. We always looked at trade shows as ways to demonstrate our product and to demonstrate our processes. But the reality of it is that the most important thing that's happening face to face is you're building a relationship with a person. So they may be looking at what you're demonstrating in your exhibit space, but they're really looking for a relationship and looking for a person they can work with and trust. So
And so as that evolution happens, then what's the role for salespeople now?
salespeople are relationship builders to start. Number one, they have a duty to build a relationship with their buyers and with their partner sales managers. So this would be the distributors, um, their other manufacturing partners. It's a relationship business. It always has been, but we just need to really lean into the idea that your reputation and your response and your dedication to your job matter to your customer.
So you have to have that first interaction with somebody in order to build a relationship.
Right.
Although, I mean, there's, I think, some people who are quite adept at creating credibility and trust through their social media presence and some other tools. But
Mhm.
let's assume that sales has to have a first meeting. So that's got to be through prospecting, or it's got to be through marketing. So as this evolution happens, what's the role of marketing now?
Right. So that's the fun part for marketing, right? So I've got to get that person in front of that salesperson. Um, it's really changed for sure. But the role of marketing, number one, is to uh, help explain the difference between the product, or let's say the how the product is going to solve the problem that the user has, right? So I'm in tech now. I was in the packaging machinery business before. The problems were the problems, right? So if I go to any customer and they say my problem is I need to reduce the cost of my packaging and I need to increase the speed of my output, right? Then does it matter to them in the end of the day which product solves that problem? Not as much, but it does. That's the main reason that they're going to talk to you, right? So that's where where the salesperson comes in. So the marketing person queues up with the problem solution. The salesperson comes up with the value proposition, right?
And it used to be very linear. We're going to talk about how I think they overlap and they're integrated, and we're going to talk about sales marketing alignment. But let's first talk. So we've talked about this kind of how buyers behaving, the role of salespeople, the role of marketing. But let's talk about buyer expectations. I mean, I think increasingly B2B buyers are accustomed to very refined B2C experiences. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Amazon dominates the market for a reason, right? We've all come to have an expectation that product information, product reviews are at our fingertips and at an instant. And like it or don't like it, but that type of domination has changed our culture as far as buying from in the B2C world. So those things they naturally reflect in our B2B business and our B2B buying behaviors for
hmm
sure.
All right, so let's start with a couple important terms from your bio: marketing and sales operations and sales enablement. So
Mhm.
what does, I would call it RevOps collectively, or maybe that's you use that term differently. What does RevOps or marketing and sales ops mean? How do you define that?
Yeah, they're really very similar, and it sometimes it depends on the industry who uses the word RevOps and who uses marketing operations, sales operations. They are interchangeable, but I firmly believe marketing and sales are aligned and they're the same department, right? They're different roles within the department, and if you think about it in terms of a restaurant, one is the server, one is the chef, right? So we're all needed to make that customer happy, and we're all part of the process. So that's, I think, what the true meaning of RevOps is. RevOps is the marketing and sales team working together toward a common goal.
And in terms of tasks, what are the tasks that RevOps or marketing and sales ops have to do, and how is it different than what you did when you were in the same role but calling it by something different in the industrial space in the late 90s?
Sure, sure. So, there was a day where you'd create a brochure, you'd create a list of features and benefits, and you'd have a set of brochures and they'd go in a binder and everybody'd be happy. You hand them over to sales and you go about your business, right? And that was my role. And it fulfilled a need. There might have been occasions where I would say, oh, let's make sure you have brochure number 4, um, you know, and then we were all set. But it's definitely changed now because I not only do I have a hand and an eye for the creative process and the creative assets we create, but very literally, I have to understand. I have to understand the product. I have to understand the value proposition, and I need to speak the way that the audience reads. Right. So I have
Right.
to understand my business in completely different ways. Um, it was a challenge for me to join a tech company. It's the first time I've had a job at a tech company in my career, and the challenge was interesting and exciting, right? So it re my brain really had to shift, and I had to start thinking about new things. I felt like I was back in school. I was actually taking certifications online so I could learn about the products, and it was fun to me. I'm also one of those lifelong learners, so that kind of ticked all the boxes. But very literally, to know the product and to know um, what's going on is part of that marketing and sales ops. The other part of it is the sales part of it, right? So I, in my role, have to make sure that the salesperson has all the materials, all the assets, all of the tools at hand to do their job. So that's not just a brochure now, that's also a database, and it's a web platform, and it's a tool for communicating with their customers, and it's a tool for demonstrating their product, and it's this and that. And there's lots of pieces and parts and uh, different programs and tools that they need. So that's part of my role as well.
And for companies that haven't had these roles in their org chart, they may well feel like, well, Jesus is adding excess headcount. It isn't necessary. We've never had to have these people. We've gotten stuff done. What would your answer be to that?
Um, that's a tough one, right? So it's tough to add headcount in a space where sales is valued above all, right? And I appreciate that, but unless you have a sales team that you know can create their own path to success, then you're limiting yourself, right? So just relying on a sales team to do the job of selling is it's a limiter, right? So bringing in that marketing and that sales ops person is bringing in a different perspective. It's bringing in a different skill set, and necessarily broadening your horizons for how you communicate and how you attract customers and how they listen to you.
I mean, you can also imagine the nightmare if sales ops wasn't or marketing ops wasn't in charge of technology and
Uh-huh.
each sales rep was setting up their own. It would be crazy.
Yeah, and I get it. And um, marketing is a tough cookie sometimes because we create a new brochure and we turn into the marketing police and have to make sure everybody's using it, or a new logo or a new color or a new thing, and it's a challenge. But that cohesive look, that cohesive design, that cohesive message does matter. But that's just one little part of it, right? So um, if you are if you have the right set of tools and the right perspective from multiple stakeholders in your own business, then you've got the ability to really have the right tool set to go forth and sell something, right? So it's not
But it
just
also,
knowing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, it also seems like that tool set has grown. Not only is there a lot of additional technology, but there's additional elements of it. I mean, I think about battle cards. We used to talk about understanding competitors, but it
Mhm.
typically wasn't codified into a very specifically formatted, consistent document that's part of the sales enablement deck. And that's I think, an interesting example of how the responsibilities of marketing and sales ops have expanded.
I absolutely agree. And I just created a new battle card for my team few weeks ago, and they never went away, right? But that's a nice little concise way of really drilling down to what your true message is.
Right.
Um, but yeah, the tool set's very large, right? And I kind of liken it to analog digital kind of world, right? We're in a digital world, and so we have the ability to do things in different ways. AI being a great example of how it's changed the landscape. But if we're not doing it, we just have to be aware that someone else is. So if we're not trying to stay ahead of the curve of technology as it relates to our jobs, then we're going to fall behind. It's just flat out the way it is. It's
Right.
not it's not a scare tactic by any stretch, but it's just one of those things where if you don't learn and you don't continue to learn as you grow and you move along in your job or your career, whatever you want to think of it, then you're just gonna stagnate or be mediocre. It's just the way it is.
All right. So you contrasted earlier. You believe that sales and marketing are essentially the same function. I completely agree. Different responsibilities, but certainly the revenue growth function. But you also alluded to the fact that often sales is put on a pedestal. So talk about sales and marketing alignment. What's involved in achieving that, and why is it important?
Yeah, so I've been a salesperson as well. So I understand that feeling of if it weren't for me, nothing would happen in this company. And, it's true, right? So we know they are the tip of the spear. We need our sales team, and they matter, and they matter a lot. But if they don't have a strong team and they don't have a strong tool set, then they're only as blunt as they possibly could be, right? So the sharper they are, the better our sales process is. My particular role, as it sits today, I'm responsible for revenue generating activity as well, right? So I'm not just responsible for saying, oh, 5 people opened my brochure today, or, I sent an email and 8% opened the email and 3% clicked. That's great. You know what? Those are great statistics, but those aren't what pay the bills, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, revenue for the company has to happen. So it was a big shift in my world as well to change the dichotomy and say we're going to look at things that actually end up creating revenue for the company. So this is what we think is going to do it, and then this is the end result. Yeah,
Do you
and
think that
it's super
marketers
important.
ought do you think that marketers ought to have some incentive component of their compensation today?
Yeah, I think so. I do. And that when I first came to the company I work at now, TechStream, that was part of the process. Everyone had a stake in the company, right? So you have a stake in the results, and it matters, right? So it makes me think differently. Is what I'm doing right now today going to affect the bottom line? Yes or no, right? Some days,
Right.
maybe not. Some days, sharp, 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 absolutely. I can
Right.
draw a straight line, but overall, that has to be part of your vision, right? It's easy to get
And,
distracted, but you've got to just kind of. It gives you a good way to stay at point.
yeah, to bring the focus back to what matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's not these vanity metrics. Well, our website visits went from 10 to 15,000. Okay, but did that create any leads? Did those leads convert to opportunities? Did those opportunities convert to customers? Have those customers renewed? I mean, all
Right.
of that kind of stuff matters.
Right. Absolutely.
How do you define sales enablement?
So, to me, sales enablement is um, making the path to a sale easier for the person doing it. Right. So, for the salesperson, giving them not only giving them those tools, but also making it easier for them to use the tools and get to that end result. Right. So, it's everything from database setup to how much information we ask for and how much is automated, how much is um, handled for them in the process, right? From the very beginning all the way to the end of the sale, the contracting, the quoting process. Um, so there's everything in between there. How many keystrokes it takes them to create an opportunity, how many times they have to touch an opportunity to move it along the sales process, and give their forecast and keep their
Hmm.
forecast up to date. It's little things like that shorten the time that a salesperson is doing admin work and give them more time back to do their sales job.
I also see that with buying teams now so much larger. I mean, Gartner research says that the typical buying team for a complex sale is 10 to 15 people at this point, I think. And
Mhm.
typically, a sales rep's going to have a primary contact, a deal champion, and maybe they'll have interaction with four or five of the other people on the buying team. But that means there's, say, 10 of them that they're not in direct contact with. And part of the sales job is to change that, to figure out how to get in touch with those people and have conversations. But sales enablement also is a set of tools to help them sell by proxy or help the deal champion sell by proxy to some of those other people on the buying team, at least in my experience. Do you see that as well?
I absolutely do. And actually, that's been an initiative for the last 2 quarters in my role. We also learned that same statistic from Gartner. The 12 people, we
Hmm.
probably know 5 or 6 of them.
Right.
And those other 5 or 6 have just as much influence on that decision, whether it be software or hardware or anything in between. It's very
Hmm.
true that there are multiple people making a decision and influencing the decision. So, in our world, how do we get our information in front of those people? And we've actually just acquired a new tool to help us do that in an interactive demo way. So
Cool.
that's a new thing we've brought in with success so far, and we're going to use that as a way to like share the information that we have, share the demo going forward, that kind of thing.
But another interesting example of the question about what does marketing ops and sales ops do. I mean, I think in that situation, then you mentioned database. Okay, well, let's understand how we can use that database automatically to enrich our CRM with the appropriate job titles for at least 10 of those 15 people so that they're right there. The salespeople don't waste time researching it. We're setting it up so they can easily begin to do cadences or whatever they're going to do to perform outreach to them.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's where that automation comes in. It really as a benefit to that salesperson, right? So if you're talking to company X, and you know 3 people there, our role to enrich the number of people, we've got intent data we use. We
Hmm.
look at database information. We look at publicly available records. We're constantly adding and updating our database information to provide those new contacts or to provide them to the sales team. And then saying, all right, Matt, you're talking to this person today. Here are the 5 other people we know there. How about we send them a demo, right? Why don't we, contact them in a different way and invite them to get to know us?
Right.
So there's kind
Yeah,
of
that's
both the air cover part, right? So there's that air cover marketing overview information from the company, and then there's that personal touch, say
right.
from
Yeah,
that rep saying, "Hey, I know you're, we're talking to so and so at your company. Thought I might share this with you so you could see what's going on as well."
that makes a lot of sense. You've done a lot of trade shows over the years, and
Mhm.
you mentioned earlier they continue to be a part of your go-to-market motion. What do you think companies miss most about their participation in events and trade shows that negatively impacts their results?
I think the biggest negative to trade show results is that you have an overactive understanding of what's going to come out of it in the immediate future, right? So, in other words, your
Happy years,
expectations get very high, right?
right?
I just came back from an event last week. Actually, I was in Vegas for a couple of days at a major event with our industry, and the expectation is high for immediate business, right? So that's great. And there will be some immediate business, but we have to have that selling process time, right? So the people that were actively talking to us at the conference during the sessions in our booth are to some extent just getting to know us, right?
Hmm.
And we still need to give them time to make all their buying decisions, and we need to give them the tools they need to get to know us, right? And that could be a 3 month process, a 6 month process, it could be even longer, and we have to have a little patience there. It's really tough when you've spent a big chunk of your marketing budget for the year on one event or one group of events, but you have to understand that things aren't going to happen immediately following.
And almost by definition, if they met you at a trade show, they also met all your competitors.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah. And that's where those differentiators come out, right? It's not just about saying, "Oh, we've got a better giveaway in our booth and we gave you a stuffed dog and they gave you a water bottle." That is really it's not essential to the end of the deal, which is, did they get what they needed to know, right? Did they come to us and say, "This is my problem," or "This is what I'm looking for," and see what they needed to see or
Right.
hear what they needed to hear?
All right. So, one of the things that I talk about frequently is how industrial manufacturers often have really well refined process for operations and for manufacturing.
Hmm.
They track KPIs, they engineer process, they run Kaizen, they continuously improve, but you don't often see that same approach on the marketing and sales side. So you've got a kind of inside baseball understanding of what it takes to bring that rigor to marketing and sales. You also have seen what it's like in the industrial environment. Why do you think that dissonance exists?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's just going it's hard to apply a an engineering principle to um, a person or a human related function, right? But in the end, um, the the ability to understand that your constant evolution as a marketer or as a salesperson is going to improve your ability to reach your customer, then that's where you'll get through that noise and get to the value, right? So yeah, it's tough. It's constantly changing your tone, constantly changing your messaging, and that's really hard for a human to do, right? It's just our nature not to do what we did the last time because it worked, but that's the dissonance that you talk about, is understanding that you can't say the same thing every time to every person. It's not going to work, right? You can't say the same thing to your 5 year old as you do to your 17-year old. It's just going to be translated differently.
but the central principles going directly to the problem that buyers have, to the outcomes they're trying to achieve, I mean, that is consistent though, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're always talking about the problem and the solution, right? That's our value proposition to the world, right? So the as a company, understanding that clearly, then that helps you to uh, refine that message for the customer, right? So having a clear understanding of what your value proposition is, what your differentiators are, and what your messaging is.
Mm-hmm.
Those three foundational elements will help you then be able to differentiate or be able to change your message to meet the customer and meet the buyer where they are.
But certainly executive mindset, ownership mindset, culture, they're really important. I mean, if a company believes enough in this stuff to have some performance compensation for the marketing people, which is relatively unusual, that's a manifestation of culture and mindset and executive emphasis. What have you observed about culture and the tone at the top that's particularly important to support RevOps, to make sure that marketing and sales are aligned, and to build collaboration around sales enablement?
You know, I feel like I'm in an ideal position right now from that lens. So I've worked with companies where leadership sees marketing as a side function, right?
Right.
And I've worked with companies that see marketing as a very valuable part of their business. Um, the company I work for right now, the CEO, I directly report to the CEO who has a stake in the marketing success of our company and cares and does realize that that marketing role affects the sales role, affects the company. And so I think there's been a sea change there, and without painting a broad brush. I think as a country and as an evolving humans, we've all as companies decided not to put marketing over into that little utility um, utility closet of employees who help things happen, but um, we're not a catch-all anymore, that's the way marketing used to be, right? A catch-all. Oh, what? Who does this? Oh, I guess it's marketing, right?
Right.
And that used to be the way it was. I don't think people look. I don't think companies generally look at marketing like that any longer because they realize that the functions have changed drastically. We're not the team that's creating the uh, proposals or the written contracts or things like that anymore. We're the team that's helping to um, bring the voice to life, the voice of the company to life.
So it's been a while since you've been out of the industrial space. Marketing in the industrial space is still primarily trade show booths, right carpet, right pad, trade journal advertising, maybe a little bit of website. But there still is that very strong orientation in the industrial space.
Yeah, I'm disappointed to hear that a little bit. And maybe that's just an evolution that needs to take place, needs to get a
Right.
little more juice behind it right now, right? So,
Well, that's
because we
exactly the
can't,
reason we're talking, to help
right,
people understand what's potential.
right. I, I mean, I was a woman in a very male dominated world back in the day. And I can't even say that should be a thing anymore, right? So, is it? Yeah, if we look at our education system where we've got to focus on STEM. We've had a focus on STEM for 15, 20 years. Graduates coming out of schools right now are diverse and much more knowledgeable about a wide range of specialties, not just engineering, not just mechanical engineering, not just packaging engineering, or
Right.
whatever thing you choose, right? Not just a one function person.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to kind of broaden our perspective there. But as a company, understanding that the way you speak about your product isn't just about features and benefits any longer. It's about how it solves the problem for the customer. That's where you're going to get ahead of your competition.
Right. You were in events when COVID hit. So obviously a rapid and dramatic change in what you were doing and the way people engaged and interacted. that I think is what brought you to tech. But with that perspective, we've talked about what companies may misunderstand about trade shows and events, but how do you think events have fundamentally changed because of COVID, or have they not? Or are we back to where we were?
That's a great question. So I think that events, of course, had to get more agile immediately, right? So we all turned into these Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, and everything became digital and recorded. I think there's a very positive part of that, which is that we never gave up that recording and that recording of and cataloging of what happened at an event, right?
Hmm.
So now we are back to live events. They matter. The energy, the understanding, the ability to have those personal interactions can't be replaced. But now, if I miss a session because I was talking to so and so over in the exhibit hall, it's okay because I can catch up with it later, right? And I have it at my fingertips, and I can catch back up with it in a month from now when I need to remember what I heard. I don't have to take notes; it's there digitally for me. That's a
Yeah, and
huge
you've got an
benefit.
AI digest of it now to simplify that.
Right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's a big benefit for sure.
What would you say has been the biggest learning for you in the technology space that you wish you'd known during the industrial days? And obviously, it's not an analog because a lot's changed in the meantime all
Hmm.
around. But something about understanding buyers and going to market and the role of marketing that is suddenly crystal clear to you because of your technology work that should have been clear in the industrial days.
Wow, that's a good one. That's a really good question. I think one of the things that sticks out the most is um, understanding the persona, right? So, uh, collectively, a team of people making a buying decision all have the end goal of whatever the success metric is, right? Whatever they decided is the thing that will make this project successful. That's the goal.
Hmm.
But what I didn't understand before, and I do understand now, is that the message is different for each one of those team members,
Right,
right? So the accountant needs to know the money,
right,
right? The CEO needs to know that we're going to get it done, and they are not going to need to hear about it,
right,
right? The chief of engineering needs to know that they'll have the support and the strategy behind from the team that they're buying from, right? They're going to have full support of making things happen, and they're going to have the enablement. So, like,
right.
the message is very different. And I don't think I grasped that a few years ago. And I don't think our teams grasp that as much as they do now.
Yeah, and again, I would say maybe in industrial, it's still not as clear. In the industrial space, in my experience, most of the marketers, most of the salespeople think about the plant engineer. That
Mm-hmm.
is their typical primary relationship. They may think about the global engineer at headquarters. They may think about purchasing, and they may think
Mm-hmm.
about, maintenance, but those are secondary. Most everything is focused on the plant engineer because that's the entree for most of the kinds of projects people work on. But you make a great point that of those 10 to 15 people, each have very different perspectives. And in fact, in many cases, some of them don't want the project to happen because they want the capital allocated to stuff in their own department. So they may be working against the project in many ways.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And that's where understanding their role in that purchasing decision matters, right? So as a marketer, what that's done for me is means that I have to have 4 or 5 different versions of my presentation sometimes, right? Because there are
Right.
different values that matter to that person, but they surface as you build that relationship. You just have to know who needs to know what and why their role is
Right.
important to the decision, right?
And then you layer on personality types. Some people want high level, some want to dive down into
Mm-hmm.
details. And sometimes those correspond generally with different job functions, but not always. So that goes back to the salespeople have to be chameleons and the marketing folks have to give them sales enablement content to make them successful.
Yeah, and there were times I remember back in the day that our salesperson would walk in with our techs when they really needed to make a sale and they couldn't get there themselves, right? So you've got the guy that has all the actual knowledge about the contract and the process and the details behind the machinery, but you're walking in with this big gruff guy with a beard who also knows how to turn the wrench, and that
Right.
colloquially even means that they're the programmer and they're involved in all of the mechanical processes. So that's part of that chameleon for sure. But you've got to be open to understanding that you can't answer every question, and that you've got a team of people that can, right?
Right.
So your customer's going to feel that way. They're the chief of engineering is going to feel that way. They're going to have a chief of maintenance. They're going to have other people on their team that will do certain things, but they have to know that you do too. You're not just the cheese stands alone in the building making everything happen. You've got a team of people they can rely on.
So often, though, it more important than the question is understanding why they're asking the question. What has happened? What are they thinking about? What are they worried about
Mm-hmm.
that prompts them to ask that question? And so many salespeople just want to answer instead of digging deeper.
It's a really valid point, and it's human nature just to give an answer, right? But
Right.
if you don't understand why they want to know, then you don't understand what their purchasing motivation is,
Right.
right? So
All right.
it's not all about selling or about saving a couple bucks. There's a motivation behind it.
Speaking of salespeople behaviors, here's a hot button topic. Is CRM use optional?
That's a flat out no. It is absolutely required in CC land. Yes, you have to have some place to document your processes and your information. I
and
am a firm believer in that.
and how do successful sales managers address the reps who resist it?
Well, there's a positive way to do it and a negative way to do it, right? So here's the thing. I as a salesperson was required to manage my process in a database. It was a pain in the butt, but it always came back to one day I would have that piece of information that I needed to move along the process for some other time, and it mattered, and I finally got a value out of it. But um, as long as you can find a way to connect the information with the sales process, then your team gets a benefit out of it, right? So as a company, obviously it's our asset, right? If you have someone leave, their laptop gets cleaned off when they depart, and then you find out that their contacts were in there, you've got a problem.
Right.
But as a salesperson, if the tool is efficient and it's easy to use and it's intuitive and it's asking you the right questions to help you get to the right answer, then you're going to use it and you're going to find
Yeah,
value.
that's a great point. Does it help you move through the sales process? Does it help you close more business? Does it help you work more efficiently, more effectively? Does it help you make more money? If it does those things, then it ought to be a no-brainer.
Right. But it's pretty much a pushback. It's very easy to push back on admin work, right?
Right.
And even our own processes day to day can be that way. A lot of sales managers say, all right, how many people did you call? And let me see your activity and let me see your things and prove to me that you've done these things. And they're enabling that thought that a database is just a to-do list and another task I have to do to prove that I'm doing my job. But at
Right.
the end of the day, they're really looking for those hallmarks of activity as well. It's just a way of communicating it. There's a better way to communicate that, but absolutely vital.
What's the biggest frustration the marketing has about sales?
Oh, easily that they're using my tools, right? So there are times when I feel like I've put blood, sweat, and tears into a tool or a process or a thing for them to use, and it goes out into the ether, and it's gone, right?
Right.
And I never know if they've used it again. And then 6 months later, they'll be like, "Hey, I wish we had this," and amazingly, it existed. Don't you remember when I showed you that? That's disappointing, but it's also endemic and to my role to make sure that I'm constantly talking about the tools, right? So I can't just say, "Hey, everybody, here's a new brochure, or here's a new video, or here's a new thing that demonstrates this part of our product," and just never talk about it again. So just like I talk about it with our customers on a frequency, I talk about it with our team.
And you've been in sales too, so vice versa. What's the biggest frustration sales has about marketing?
Oh, I'm sure it has to do with policing the way that they do their job, right? So, and I felt this in my own time, but I'm sure that sales feels like they're under scrutiny for how they say things and being told how to say things differently than they do. And in reality, it's just I feel like the truth of the matter is that marketing is just trying to help them refine the way they say things so it sounds right. But sales takes it as an offensive kind of thing, and you can't look
Right.
at things that way, right? It in general, it's how to serve the ice cream, how to make the ice cream look perfect on the cone, and that's how the kid across the window is going to take it and want to come back tomorrow for another cone, right? That's all it's about.
Right. Sales channel used to be very different when the leads all came through, physical interactions, whether it was trade show or pulling Thomas Register Green Book off the shelf or bingo cards and magazines. And now it's all online.
Hmm.
And you've been on both sides of the channel relationship. So how do you think that the online nature of business is changing channel sales and the related marketing challenge?
It's really had a different effect on it. So I always think that there's that typical research and knowledge base that you can get from a search online, right? So whether it be SIC codes or NAICS code, you've got all sorts of databases and company information you can look up. But um, it's changed a lot to show us to if you think about intent data, if you think about the that partner and that channel rep, what's their key customer list, right? So I can look up and say, all right, in the state of Minnesota, there are 500 companies that I could sell my product to, right? But if I go to my rep in Minnesota and I say, of these 500 companies, who do you want to sell to? And why would you want to sell to them? The list is completely different, right?
Right.
And that's
Yeah,
where you've got to kind of meet
and
them.
then maybe the next piece is how could our products help you get into some of the accounts that you want to be selling other stuff to?
Exactly right. Exactly right. We have a lot of programs now where we're not just talking about the sale, but we're talking about maybe the long tail, right? So
Hmm.
you've made the sale, and now you have that renewal kind of product, right? This isn't just talking about the consumables that come along with the machine, but it's talking about 6 months from now, are they getting what they thought they were getting out of that equipment,
Right.
and are they optimizing it? And is there um, a 1 hour workshop we can have to make sure that they're going to the next level, right? And can we then do some analysis there 6 months, 9 months, 12 months out, where we say, are you getting what you thought you were going to get out of this? And what are the pain points? What are the overachieving points? Where do we need to balance out the load of success here?
What do you say to traditional companies that may have the attitude, well, our buyers don't use the internet like they do in the tech industry?
I Without sounding rude, I can't imagine that you would think that these days. I
I
honestly,
was going to say,
how
is the
could you
pause because you're trying to think
possibly?
of a polite way to say it, or
Yes.
what?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, it very much is. There's no conceivable way at this point to think that your customer's not using the internet. Period.
But not everyone uses social media, and that's a different but related topic. I mean, I know, for
Hmm.
instance, you're not an active poster on LinkedIn. I don't know, you may be in it all the time, but you're not actively putting a lot of stuff out there. Why don't you? And then kind of the second question is, what do you say to buyers who say, well, they don't use social media in our industry?
That's a great differentiator right there because we're all using the internet. Social media is a corner of the internet, right? It's a quadrant. Um, I am posting pretty frequently, 3 to 4 times a week for my company, but I don't post as a person typically. So if you look up Cece, you're not going to see a lot of Cece likes or posts or whatever. And that's probably my own fault. So I'm not building my own personal brand, but but I just want to challenge the assumption that um, social media does not make the internet, and the internet is not just social media, right?
Hmm.
So let's look at that as one little corner of the internet, and let's remember that people are researching and they're reading reviews and they're looking for videos and they're studying things and they're watching YouTube, and all of those things have nothing to do with social media.
Do you find reviews are still as effective? I mean, I think the data now says that they've been so gamified that the average rating is 4.8 or something. Do people still turn to reviews?
I think people look at reviews, but then they also use that caveat that they know, right? So I think we all, if you think about this, they always say, look at the Yelp reviews for the next restaurant you're going to. And if it's a 4, go. If it's a 4.5, don't go because it's a lie, right? Um, go to the 3 to 4s, don't go to the 4 to 5s. Um, yes, we absolutely know that that's gamified. And it's also, uh, it's not reliable because it's based on the loudest voice for the positive and the loudest voice for the negative. That
Right.
being said, people still look at them, but we know, I think generally as a buyer that we have to take that with a grain of salt.
A lot of people I speak to believe that community is the next iteration of reviews, that having a group, some sort of a professional association, not so much like a trade association, but more like Pavilion or one of those groups that pulls people together around certain business functions and allows for the exchange of ideas and best practices and asking for references and referrals. Hey, I'm looking for the best marketing automation. What do you recommend? Or what's the best chatbot software? That kind of thing. Are you seeing, is there any impact from communities that you see in your business?
Absolutely. Yeah. User groups is one great example there. I'm a
Okay.
member of a user group or two myself, um, but we also host user groups, right? So that opportunity for people with like responsibilities to just share their positives and negatives, it's agnostic to the product.
Hmm.
It's absolutely vital to the person to just have that shared experience, right?
Right.
So those are super important. And um, I think the user groups, physical user groups and virtual user groups are very vital. They're almost taking the place of that review, but not really because we don't always have to stand in front of each other and say, "Oh, did you use product A? Yeah, I did. I liked it, and this is what." That's not what that's about. It's about just understanding that there are other people out there with the same problems and
Right.
building that relationship. I have a Gartner uh, license. I'm a member of Gartner. I can go on their peer review page at any time and ask any question, right?
Hmm.
And I get just as much value out of that as reading other people's questions. They have nothing to do with the problems that I'm facing today, but sometimes I'm reading it and get an idea.
Right.
So,
But that's interesting because you're working on behalf of a channel partner.
right,
And it used to be that companies would think, well, that kind of thing is responsibility of the primary vendor and channel partners just tag along. That's a big shift where now the channel partner has to be responsible for a lot of their own marketing, for creating their own community, for a lot of that kind of stuff that they've traditionally relied on vendors for in the past.
that's right. That's absolutely right. I can't wait around for the vendor to spoon feed me a lead, right?
Right.
That's not the way this business goes. Any business goes. But I have to bring value to the channel, and the channel has to bring value to me. So I trust in the product that I'm representing, but I bring value with the services that I provide. So that's the marriage that makes the purchase work.
We talked earlier about what I might call utopia, when marketing and sales is really well aligned, what the benefits are, how it looks, why it's important. let's talk about the flip side. If they're not aligned, what are the symptoms that you think are most commonly arise?
Um, that's a great question because I think the lack of alignment causes friction internally and externally, right? I think it's very clear to your buyers and to your customers when there's friction between the sales and marketing process,
Right.
right? So that I had this recently happen to me in a very negative way. I asked for a demo of a product via I had seen information about it. I asked for a demo via their website, and I got a call from a rep. I got a call from a business development person who set up a call with a sales rep, who, after all these steps, got me on the call, pulled up the link, the deck that marketing had provided them, and then immediately said, I haven't even looked at this deck. So let me go to slide 6 and show you that one. It's the only
Wow.
one I think that matters.
Wow.
Right? So I was ticking all the what never to do when you're selling something to anybody. But the
Right.
point being that if you don't believe in what you're given by marketing, then you're never going to come across effectively,
Right.
right? Marketing's not going to make the sale happen completely, but if you don't believe in the tools that you're using, then you're going to come across as ineffective, for
I
sure.
forget the stats, but I've seen stats about the low regard in which most B2B buyers hold sales reps. And the fact that somebody would show up for a meeting and say, hey, I didn't do anything to prepare, but let me waste your time with, something here rather than address what you said was your requirement.
Absolutely, right?
Wow.
And to the point where and I had, believe it or not, a salesperson never learned this, but the CEO of my company had interest and in the product, and because of that, they didn't get any business from us.
Hmm.
We even asked for a
Wow.
different sales rep at one point to see if we could learn something different, and it didn't go
Wow.
anywhere.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So we talked about buying journeys and how people are doing their research. I think you kicked off our conversation talking about how buyers do their research on their own. Statistically, the number I see most often is that they're somewhere around 70% of the way through their buying journey before they want to talk to a rep. Given that, you've kind of touched on it, but give me a little bit more detail on why or how you have to, in marketing and in sales, adjust the mindset that you're starting, 2/3 of the way through so that you're not pissing off buyers like you described the situation you experienced.
Right. So there's two parts to that. One is the type of information, right? So I'm not just introducing someone to a concept of this is product X and giving them a definition of what that is and why it the definition and the key terms and um, explanation of what that product does. I'm not meeting them there. I'm meeting them along the journey where they're saying, why is your product going to solve my problem, right? So um, I think of it in a couple of ways. One is that I don't want to have any endpoints, right? So if you see a case study from my company and you read that, where are you going to go next? Hopefully, you're going to read another case study, or you're going to go to this page and you're going to read additional information I have about, why that mattered to that customer, what the value proposition was. But the idea that there are no endpoints or no stop signs, but only, off ramps, as we call it, right? So
Right.
you're always able to go to the next place and then you get back on, you go over here. That's part of that journey, right? So you don't know where it's to be very specific to that nonlinear conversation. It's a circular kind of activity.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you're bringing up journey. I think often the leads that most folks let me say that differently. What most folks would call a lead is somebody who's in the decision phase of their buying journey. They
Mm-hmm.
they think they've identified their problem. They think they've identified the right solution to it. They've identified potential vendors, and now they're comparing them. Do we want to move ahead? Do we want to buy this, and from whom do we want to buy it? But of course, at that point, everyone's involved, and it becomes a much more difficult sales job to try to differentiate based on features than if you can join early on and differentiate based on expertise and ability to help the customer figure out what they need to fix and why it may not be what they think and how different solutions might have different implications. So what I would call pre-awareness phase content. So, something that highlights for them the fact that whatever they're doing now may not be optimal, even if they haven't stopped to think about it, but to get them to pause and put a little bit of time into thinking about what that might be costing them and how they might go about fixing it. But with that long introduction, my experience is that's one of the hardest things for marketers and salespeople to think about because they're so conditioned to focus on the product and the problems. Is that something that you have any particular advice how companies can or marketers can reframe their thinking to create that kind of helpful content?
Yeah, I think that's a very and we kind of talked about that before. I liken it to, a 5-year-old coming and saying, "Mom, do you have a pair of scissors?" The first thing that person's going to do is say, "Why does this 5-year-old need a pair of scissors?" Right? And if they
Right.
didn't, well, you're about to find out why. But the truth of the matter is, if you stop and give yourself that half a beat to think that through, then you're going to be more effective with your answer, right? So, in the sense of the business proposition, the sales process, when the question's asked, think about why the question is asked, right? If I'm told my renewal rate is high and do I have any special terms, why are they asking that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is it because they don't understand the value? Is it because they can't afford the product? There's a big range there of reasons why they would ask that question,
Right.
and the answer is not the same
And
for each of
sometimes
those
it's just
reasons.
because they want to see if they yank your chain, if they'll get a better price.
That's right, absolutely right. Just see what kind of give they can get, and that's
Yep.
that's okay too. Understanding that flexibility, I would certainly hope you've got that built into your pricing model. But at the end of the day, you've got to, if you give yourself a second to think about why that's being asked, then your answer is going to be a little more on point.
Sure. Your professional journey shows a lot of personal growth and willingness to try new things and work in very different environments. What's something so where you've got this ability to grow and to adapt at the same time, it probably doesn't work in every aspect of your life. What's something that you've put a lot of effort into but you just have never gotten very good at?
Oh, that's a really good question. You're going to make me mention my vulnerabilities now, right? No, it's really difficult to put your time and effort into learning a particular process and then not having it bear fruit, right? So I've done this before where I thought that this was going to be the next best thing,
Hmm.
right? And I wouldn't have been the only person thinking that, but I've picked a few products or things that we've spent time on, only to learn 6 months or a year down the road that they really didn't have return on investment.
Hmm.
Right? That's frustrating. Frustrating, but it happens, and you have to understand that that mistake is going to help you inform your next good decision. Right? So um, definitely the acquired knowledge never hurts. It's also something I kind of can lean on now and realize that, I'm not going to break the bank by making one little mistake, but it's certainly, there's always something that you're going to spend too much time on with little reward.
Right. You've been a salesperson, now you're a marketer. Do you still consider yourself a salesperson or is that a different part of your life?
I still consider myself a salesperson, and that's an interesting persona, right? Because I'm not a salesperson in any way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, I am selling my product to my own sales team, right?
Hmm.
Via whatever messaging I'm creating or my own value to them as a team, right? As a team member. So I'm selling myself and my value to the team always.
Speaking of selling, I think there's no doubt that the hardest part about selling these days is getting into new accounts. I mean, everyone's just so busy, everyone's so overwhelmed. By the time
Mm-hmm.
somebody's focused their attention on something, it's because now it's a high priority and they're talking to people. And my sense is that you're in a space in managed services where people wish they just didn't have to think about it. They wish it just happened in the background, and everything took care of itself. So from a marketing and prospecting perspective, what's the key to getting attention, or what methods have you found? I mean, we spoke at one point about kind of doing some benchmarking or doing some audits, and we talked about small sales that will get you in where you can build a commercial relationship. And I know you talk about partnerships. Are there any of those that you have found are particularly effective?
I think it's a combination. You can't just rely on one,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a combination of all of those things. Um, Sometimes the case study with that product or that company that bought from you that's similar to the next customer is the thing that makes them turn and pay attention. Sometimes it's the credentials you have with the product, right? So you're an elite provider, you're an elite partner, you've got the qualifications to back up your sales process.
Right.
Sometimes that's the thing that matters, but it's having a broad range of things that will meet the particular customer where they're at. So there's not one magic bullet anymore.
So
There's a
everything works and
whole,
nothing works is the way I've heard a lot of people put it.
yeah, yeah.
Partnerships is a term that for some reason is pregnant with a lot of different meanings to everybody. How do you define partnerships?
That's a really good question too. So partnerships to me means that you have a common goal and you jointly achieve the goal by providing what you have in your own arsenal to the other part of the partnership, right? So A and B together have their strengths and they have their things to bring to the table. And that if they're there together as equal partners and as equal contributors, then they'll be successful, right?
So obviously different companies, different P&Ls, different ownership objectives, but at the intersection there has to be a common goal that animates it. Otherwise it's just a transaction as opposed to a partnership. Is that fair?
It's absolutely correct, right? Um, you can't just buy and sell machinery from somebody and be successful long term. You've got to
Right,
have a true partnership with them.
right. So you live now in a digital world. You're selling digital products for companies that are, need them to work 24/7. I'm sure
Right.
you've got marketing that runs 24/7. There's automation behind what you're doing that never shuts down. So, it's a pretty stressful environment. How do you take time to center your karma and escape that stress?
So, so typically, there's a couple of things I like to have. I have a strategy hour on my calendar every week, right?
Okay.
So it's just an hour I have devoted to me being able to free think. It's important, right? I feel like I'm not getting anything done, but in the end, I am getting a lot done, right?
Right.
So I don't have any output necessarily, but I have some input.
Hmm.
And you have to give yourself that free thinking time. Doesn't matter what kind of job you have. But you have to just allow yourself also the space to solve a problem, right? I, if I'm presented with a problem or a challenge, I have to give myself time. I've got to give my brain time
Right.
to work through the problem and the resolution somewhere in the back of my mind while I'm just doing my daily job, right? So you've got to give yourself that grace. And I like that hour time I have. I tend to give it away if I have something urgent pop up. But if I give it away, then I'm only taking it out of my own piggy bank, right?
I love that point about giving yourself time to just process in the background decisions. I find that's really helpful. But at the same time, I thought your answer was going to be something like, yoga or your time with what you call your fur babies or something like that.
Well, the fur baby is on the floor next to me right now, so I could
Got it.
easily reach down and get a pet. But yeah, no, you got to always, there's always outside things that have to happen outside of the workspace. Um, and speaking of digital things, I've got my wearable device that reminds me I need to stand up or that I need to go move about the cabin or whatever.
Right.
So there's that thing, but that's also a tension builder too if I sit still too long. But yeah, so we've got all sorts of things outside of the work. But if you're thinking about being an effective employee or an effective in your role, then you've got to give yourself time in that role as well, right? So it's
Your
not just about developing myself, it's developing inside my role.
your companion is a dog or a cat?
It's a dog,
What kind?
Chihuahua.
Got it.
Yeah. He's a very ancient Chihuahua at this point. That's why he likes to lay next to me in the office. Yeah. I always had big dogs, and none of my friends would know that I would ever have been a small dog person, but here I am.
It's great because you can take them so many places. Although I guess with the Atlanta
Yes.
heat, there's probably some limits on where you can take your buddy with you.
Well, they're usually riding, right? So they're easily pocket pets now, and they can go with us, but they travel and do all those things
Oh, that's
very
fun.
easily. Yes. Yeah.
You talked earlier about testing new ideas. You have an idea, how you go about testing it. What
Mhm.
experimentation or testing have you begun to do with AI?
So that's fun. So we've done a few things. Obviously, from the graphic standpoint, there's a little bit of AI graphics that we've played around with. It's a little bit of a challenge. We consider AI its own language, right? So in a way, you've got to learn how to create the right
Mm-hmm.
prompt. So having to speak, that's speaking the language of AI. So creating the right prompt and coming up with the right thing. Graphics are hit or miss, but as an information source, it's a great way to ask a question in a new way and get an answer pretty quickly. So, as a marketer, I'm not looking at it as a tool that takes away the fun part, but what I'm looking at it for is a way to refine the things I'm saying, maybe, or the things I'm thinking about, and to give me something else to think about when I go about and go do my creative work.
So you're not using it for content creation, text content. You have experimented for graphic content.
Correct. So I've experimented outside of my own little pocket of world, and our website has a couple of AI generated
Mm-hmm.
images and some things like that. I look to it for ideas for
Got
writing,
it.
but in the end, I cannot rely on the writing itself in the outside world. It's too easy for me. It's too easy to know something's AI generated. I can tell when some of my employees have written something that's AI generated. Like right now, they hate it,
Right.
but you can't. It's too easy to understand, to see that it's AI generated
Right.
at this juncture. Maybe someday, but
So AI is one place that you go to mine for new ideas, but where else do you go? What books or blogs or podcasts or YouTube channels? Where do you recommend industrial marketers, industrial salespeople wanting to try to incorporate RevOps into their business to replicate the success that you've had and incorporate the lessons that you've shared? Where would they go to learn more about how to do that?
so that's a great question too. So sometimes I see that I have to go to the other side of my brain, right? So if I'm working on something that's very creative, I need to get analytical about it for a minute. If I'm working on something that's very number based or analytical, I need to get creative about it, and I need to have that switch in my brain in order to get the message revealed, right? So finding the right opposite, right? So for me, sometimes it's a podcast. I listen to several podcasts because it takes me out of my eyes and into my ears, right? And that's a change that your brain needs. And then sometimes you hear things that you don't see and you think of them differently
Any
because your mind is making the physical vision.
any particular podcast you recommend?
So I like to listen to Alan Alda. He has a podcast that's science based, and he interviews various people. I'm trying to think of the name of the podcast right now. I can't think of it. I need to give you the name of that. But Alan Alda has a great
Hmm.
podcast. It He's got a great voice to listen to, interesting ideas, science based ideas. Right? Doesn't mean that applies to my particular
Right.
job, but it helps me to think critically.
Yeah, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
So if you thought I dated you by talking about fax machines, you certainly dated yourself by talking about Alan Alda.
Yeah. Yes, I did.
All right.
Star of stage and screen of the 70s,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. MASH.
Right.
So, most important tool in your marketing and sales technology toolbox, not CRM, but if you could only pick one other tool, what would it be?
The website,
Okay, I should have said not
my
CRM and
website.
not website.
Not CRM or not website. Okay. So if it's not CRM or website, then it has to be my communication tool, right? So is that my email or my way to communicate
Okay.
otherwise, right? So sales loft, sales engagement kind of thing.
Thinking about the typical industrial organizational structure, 1 to 2 marketing folks, mostly focused on trade shows, like we talked about earlier, with maybe
Hmm.
10 to 30 sales reps. If you were going to come into an industrial company today as a CRO, how would you change that org structure?
Well, I'd give a little time, right? I really hate when people go in and immediately change headcount before they understand the inner workings of a company. But that being said, um, I would definitely find those people that can bridge the gap between sales and marketing, right? So it's an unusual kind of set of skills, but the person that can do sales enablement, let's say, so someone on the marketing team who can talk to those customers at the 6 month point and make sure they're happy and get them to the right person. That's where I would bridge the gap. It wouldn't be a loss or a gain from any particular department necessarily. It would find those people that ride the line in the middle and can play on both sides
Got it.
and change in those roles.
When a sales rep goes on a PIP or a performance improvement plan, does marketing have a role in helping them successfully graduate from that PIP?
I think so, yes. As long as they know about it. Sometimes they don't, right? It's obvious when people don't meet their quota
Right.
or their sales goals. But if you don't know that a person's on a PIP, then you can't do much about it. But um, certainly the role of a marketer would be to say, all right, this is what you need. Let me put some things in front of you and open up the doors for you to eliminate
Mm-hmm.
barriers, right? Um, I've seen it happen recently, and just basically kind of take away some of those restraints that keep them from being successful. At the end of the day, sometimes a PIP is because of a personality too, right? So if you can take away your own personality and your own rules from that person and allow them to be themselves
Right.
and still be effective, then you're going to make a difference.
What tool, what marketing ops or sales ops, what tool does marketing or sales ops provide that you think is the most underappreciated by the reps that have it to use?
Mhm. The most underappreciated, I think, the campaign summaries. And I'm going to tell you why that. So we create campaigns based on personas and based on products that we want to sell to that persona.
Mm-hmm.
And we summarize all of that. So we say, okay, if you're talking to this persona and this customer that has this problem, here's all the things you can use to meet their needs. And it's basically a summary of all the tools in the toolbox for that person or for that type of
Mm-hmm.
buyer. And I think that those summaries are often forgotten for what they really are, which is a way to go in and say, oh, I forgot this one thing. Let me hand it to my customer and see if that makes a difference.
Got it. How do folks connect with you if they're frustrated with their MSP, want to learn more about TechStream, want to connect with Cece and kind of be in touch or learn more from your expertise? What's the best way to go about doing that?
Sure. Well, we're online at techstream.com, tekstream.com. I'm available through the website or at via my email. Happy to connect with anybody. You can connect with me through the website or through this channel here. I'm sure Ed provides information connections at the end.
Absolutely.
Be happy to provide my information there. And yeah, look me up.
Cool.
Always on LinkedIn.
So looking forward 5 years from the go-to-market motion perspective, thinking about it from
Mhm.
marketing, from sales, from RevOps. What's your biggest concern? What are companies most likely to screw up as they go forward?
Most likely to screw up. I think we're most likely to speed past opportunities that are there, just not in our own time frame.
So in other words,
Right?
you have to recognize it and be able to nurture it.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
And that kind of
Not
comes
easy to
back to
restrain.
salespeople have just been so hammered. They need to run a BANT. They need to know, is there budget? Is there authority? Is there a need? And is there a timeline to do it? Not, hey, this is somebody that's really busy with a complex set of problems that they manage day in and day out. Mine's not the highest priority. Let me gradually cultivate this relationship.
That's right. That's right. And understanding that the pipeline of 10 percenters is just as important as the pipeline of 90s, right? So having that wide range of qualifications and continuing to nurture each level,
I think
right?
the reason I love that you finished with that is because that kind of brings us full circle back to sales enablement, marketing and sales operations, helping marketing and sales collaborate. And that nurturing has to be largely driven by marketing with guidance and periodic participation from sales. But it goes to this whole topic of an integrated function.
That's right. That's right.
Cool. Well, what a powerful way to finish. This has been awesome, Cece. It's great to reconnect. I was reminiscing a lot about the what seemed like the simpler days as I was preparing for this and thinking about some of the mutual experiences we had. Thank you for so many great insights, and thanks for taking some time to join me and the Industrial Growth Institute podcast audience today.
I really appreciate your time, Ed, and it's been a lot of fun. And shout out to Kevin and Rick. You better have listened to this whole thing, right?
Sounds good. So, for everyone listening, thank you for your time. Thanks for your attention. And don't forget, please hit the bell, like it, share it, comment on it. Make sure you pass it along to other folks. There's probably somebody in your company who you realize now, having heard some of what Cece's talking about, they may be trying to do marketing or sales ops, but they haven't put their name on it yet. This could be really helpful to them. So, please share it with them. Thanks very much.